The mules of the US Army during World War II, these vehicles were used in many different roles, and they show up in every war movie or documentary as they move along the road in a long column. So let's see the history of the M2 and M3 half-tracks. The roots of these vehicles reach back to the 1930s. The US Army experimented with different types of light vehicles to be used as scout cars and personal carriers after World War I, and in the mid-1930s trialed a series of designs. The first of these vehicles developed by the White Motor Company was the M1 Scout Car in 1934. It was a four-wheel drive vehicle featuring half-an-inch thick armor plates and a maximum speed of 50 miles an hour. It was not really a purpose-built scout car though, more of a converted truck. Not long after, in 1935, it was immediately followed by the M2 version, which was larger and more powerful than its predecessor. The following M3 version was a more advanced development, showing some of the features which were later applied to the half-tracks too, like the skate rail for the machine gun around the body. This vehicle was further developed into the M3A1 Scout Car, which featured a wider body, a front roller, and an improved engine. This version has seen a production run of more than 20,000 units between 1939 and 1944. And when we look at the picture, we can already guess how the half-tracks were developed. In the late 1930s, after the Scout cars went into service with the US military, the cavalry found that their off-road capabilities are lacking. Despite the four-wheel drive, in deep mud or on wet terrain they had troubles, as the vehicle weighted almost 6 tons and the wheels easily sunk into the soft ground. The US Army experimented with half-track vehicles before, using French Citroën Kegress vehicles. So in 1938 the White Company took the rear suspension from the T9 half-track truck and mated it with the M3 Scout Car. This vehicle was the T7 half-track. The new vehicle had much better off-road capabilities than the Scout cars, due to its much lower ground pressure and better traction. But during testing it was found to be very underpowered, especially as it was intended for multiple roles, including prime mover and artillery tractor. Nonetheless, it provided valuable information. So when in 1939 it became clear the Army needs a large number of half-tracks for various roles, and the Ordnance Department laid out specifications for an armored half-track designated T14, the experiences collected with the T7 were applied. The pilot vehicle was built in the first months of 1940 and was tested at Aberdeen from May until September. The vehicle needed some refinements though, as in its original form it didn't meet all the expectations. Mainly the rear suspension needed modifications, as to speed up building the vehicle, the T7 rear suspension was used, featuring a rear drive sprocket, steel bogies, and 10-inch wide tracks, while the specification asked for front sprocket drive, 12-inch wide tracks, and rubber bogies. The Ordnance Committee ordered it to be standardized as half-track car M2 with a capacity of carry 10 men. A version which was extended by 10 inches was standardized as half-track personal carrier M3. For these vehicles the white 160A engine was selected. The Army needed so many of the new half-tracks that one manufacturer wouldn't have been able to fulfill the orders. So Auto Car Company, Diamond T Motor Company, and White Motor Company all received orders. The three companies and the Ordnance Department held a meeting in October 1940 to make sure all the vehicles are standardized and the parts will be interchangeable. The first production vehicles were delivered in May 1941. As we mentioned, the body of the M3 variant was 10 inches longer, but mechanically the two vehicles were similar and featured similar armor protection. The M3 had its internal arrangement changed, the fuel tanks moved, and additional seats installed to carry more passengers. The development of the vehicles didn't stop after they entered production. On the field several problems occurred with the new vehicles, and the biggest was the idler in the rear suspension. Originally it was a fixed piece which didn't allow enough compensation on rough terrain, and the vehicles often damaged their rear suspension or throw the track because of that. While the Ordnance Department were thinking about changing the design, the men at the 2nd Armored Division came up with their own solution, replacing the fixed idler with an eye bolt, a nut, and a coil spring, which solved the problem. The modification worked so well that the suggestion was brought up the command chain to Ordnance, where it was approved and the parts were bought to modify all the half-tracks. A bit later, in early 1943, a more advanced double-spring idler modification was ordered in production. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the expansion of the Army resulted in such a need for half-tracks, which the three original manufacturing companies couldn't cope with, so International Harvester Company was brought in. The International Harvester models used some new parts, but the overall layout followed the same configuration, and their performance was similar to the other half-tracks. They have some identifying features though, mainly the different-shaped front fenders, and because they were built with welded construction, the rounded corners on the back. The variants built by this company were standardized summer 1942 as half-track car M9 and half-track personal carrier M5. In mid-1942, the gun mounts on the half-tracks were upgraded as well to use a ring gun overhead, and these versions were standardized as M2A1, M3A1, M5A1, and M9A1 versions. Now let's take a look at the main variants of these half-tracks. The base variants of the M2 half-track car were the original M2, which featured the skate rail gun mount, the M2A1 with the improved ring gun mount, and the M9 version built by International Harvester. Though by the time this would go to production, the improved gun mounts were adopted, so basically all of them were built as M9A1 variants. The M3 models were similarly developed, with the original M3 as the base model, the M3A1 featuring the ring gun mount, and the M5 and the upgraded M5A1 versions built by International Harvester. The M2 had two main self-propelled gun variants. The M4 with an 81mm M1 mortar, which was meant to be fired after dismounting, but later the A1 update was meant to be fired from the vehicle. The other was the M2 equipped with a 37mm gun, the same anti-tank gun that was mounted on the M6 gun motor carriage. The bigger M3 had more variants. The most well-known is the 75mm M3 gun motor carriage, carrying the M1897 75mm gun. The T-19 howitzer motor carriage was equipped with the M2A1 105mm howitzer. Another variant of the T-19 was equipped with the 81mm mortar. The T-30 75mm howitzer motor carriage was equipped with the M1A1 75mm howitzer. Almost 1,000 units were built from the T-48 gun motor carriage, equipped with the M1 57mm gun. Most of these were supplied to the Allies through Lend-Lease, and the majority of them went to the Soviet Union, where they were called Su-57s. The M2 half-track had a few prototype test variants for anti-aircraft duty, like the T-1E1 featuring two 50 caliber machine guns on a Bendix turret. The T-1E2 variant also featured twin 50 caliber machine guns, but they were mounted on a Maxon turret. The T-1E3 prototype featured the same turret used on B-17 bombers, but this proved to be too complicated. The T-28 combination gun motor carriage was equipped with a 37mm autocannon and two water-cooled 50 caliber machine guns. In the end, these variants stayed prototypes, as it was decided to use the longer M3 chassis for anti-aircraft variants. The M3-based variants were the M13 equipped with two 50 caliber machine guns on a Maxon turret, the M16 featuring a quad mount and four 50 caliber machine guns. A sub-variant of this was the M17, which used the International Harvester M5 chassis and was intended for Lend-Lease. The T-28E1 was similar to the M2-based T-28. It used a 37mm autocannon and two water-cooled 50 caliber machine guns. They didn't get further than the prototype phase, but the gun arrangement was used on the M15 half-track, with the water-cooled 50 cal swapped for air-cooled ones. There were numerous experimental versions to mount the 40mm Bofors gun on the half-track chassis. Because of the very hard recoil from the 40mm gun, all of them failed. The half-tracks were one of the longest serving vehicles in the US Army. Already in service before World War II and still in use well after the war. They were first used in the defense of the Philippines against the Japanese. In the fight, they were a valuable asset as self-propelled artillery. Later, during Operation Torch, the landing in North Africa, almost all the half-track variants participated. The personnel carriers, self-propelled guns, and anti-aircraft variants too. At first the M3 gun motor carriage was used as a tank destroyer, but not too long, as soon the purpose-built M10 took their place. I have already made a video on the M10 tank destroyers. If you're interested in the history of those vehicles, I recommend you check it out. See the link in the description or at the end of this video. The half-tracks were used all through the African campaign, and later in Sicily and Italy as well. They participated in the Normandy landings, where the anti-aircraft variants were valuable of keeping the enemy aircraft away from the beaches. These variants were later used for infantry support as well, as the 450 caliber machine guns could lay down a very effective suppressive fire. They were used heavily on the Pacific as well during the island hopping campaign. Again, using all the variety of the half-tracks, the M3 gun motor carriage, the M16 and M15 anti-aircraft variants. They were used in all theaters of the war in many roles, and many Allied countries received them too. The Soviet Union, the British, the Free French, the Canadians, the Australians. They stayed in service after World War II and participated in the Korean War as well, particularly the M16 and M15 anti-aircraft variants, which were again used many times for infantry support. In this role, the crew of the gun was unprotected against enemy fire, so a folding shield was developed to protect the loaders in combat. During the 1950s, most of them were phased out from the US service, but they were used long after by other countries. They participated in the Arab-Israeli War in 1948, the Indochina War, the Suez Crisis, in the Six-Day War, and even in the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. The half-tracks were an important part of the Allied armies, and they served in many roles at all theaters of the war. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.